Hello students, welcome to this class of MA Final, and today we'll discuss an important poem, a love poem for a wife, I, that is one, and it is composed by A.K. Ramanujan, the great Indian writer writing in English. I am Dr. S.S.Vaidwan, Department of English. So dear students, let us begin with the poem, love poem for a wife, 1. A.K. Ramanujan, he was born on 16th March 1929 and he died on 13th July 1993, an Indian poet and scholar of Indian literature. He was a trilingual poet, so a very learned man, a trilingual poet who wrote in English, Tamil and Kannada. Ramanujan, he was a poet, a scholar, he was a professor, philologist, folklorist, translator and playwright. So a great personality who was a poet, a writer, a professor and a translator. He translated his own poetry into English. He was an advocate of classical and modern variants of literature and argued strongly for giving local non-standard dialects their due. So he was in favor of the writing in Indian languages, Kannada, Tamil, Sanskrit. He was awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award posthumously in 1999 for the collected poems. Dear students, let us talk about the education of A.K. Ramanujan. He was educated at Marimallappa High School, Mysore, and at the Maharaja's College of Mysore. In college, Ramanujan excelled in science, but his father persuaded him to change his major from science to English. So, he now started learning the language and the literature. Later, Ramanujan became a fellow of Deccan College, Pune in 1958-59 and a Fulbright scholar at Indiana University in 1959 to 62. He was educated in English at the University of Mysore and he received his PhD in linguistics from Indiana University. Let us talk about the poetry collections of Ramanujan. The Striders, published in 1966, Relations, published in 1971, Selected Poems, published in 1976, Second Sight, and the Collected Poems, published in 1997. So let us, dear students, now discuss the poem, love poem for a wife. I request you to open your books and let us read the poem. Really, what keeps us apart at the end of years is unshared childhood. You cannot, for instance, meet my father. He is some years dead. Neither can I meet yours. He has lately lost his temper and mellowed. So, dear students, the poem, it opens with the husband, that is the writer, speaking to his wife. The poet he argued that his wife about the disharmony in their relations. Even after so many years of married life, he says that they do not share childhood melodies. That is, they didn't knew each other at the age of childhood, and he we can say he Ramanujan, he shows that had we been childhood friends, we would have been much better understood and we would have understood each other better. Then he says that my father, he is some years dead, that he is no more and he is dead. And he says that neither can I meet yours. He has lately lost his temper. He says that your father, who was very short tempered earlier, now he has mellowed. That is, his father is dead, and he remembers their wife's father, who was a man of loose temper. But now he has mellowed. That is, he has softened. In the transverse midnight gossip of cousins, reunions, among brandy, fumes, cashews, and the absence of grandparents, you suddenly grow nostalgic for my past, and I envy you your village dog ride and the mythology. He says that in the parties, you enjoy these parties and you cut across relationships in parties. He says that I now remember your past, the old beliefs which are not real, your mythology and your belief in the mythologies, your envy about the story of your dog ride, and he, in a way, he mocks the midnight parties where drinking, that is brandy, fumes, that is smoking, cashews, and the absences of grandparents, that is nobody discussed grandparents, and they were all enjoying smoking, drinking, and enjoying themselves. So, in a way, we can say that in the poem, he speaks about his and his wife's relatives. The poem is an account of the speaker's married life and the reasons which have led to the failure of his marriage, particularly the worsening of the conjugal relation situation with the passing of years. That is, as they are maturing, their relationship is worsening. The poem, uh, this poem, Love Poem for a Wife, I, shows Ramanujan's gifts of humor, wit, and irony. The poem is ironical in tone. The title itself suggests that it is an ironical title, a love poem which he has written. The poem is an exposure by the speaker of the deficiencies, shortcomings, and faults of the woman whom he has married. Let us start the next stanza. Of the seven crazy aunts, now he questions the invented story of seven crazy aunts of his wife. It is not real, it is all imaginative story. You begin to recognize me as I pass from ghost to real and back again in the albums of family rumors, in brothers' anecdotes of how noisily father bathed. So these are petty incidents over which quarrel often starts, and these petty situations, these petty talk about the brother, his stories, and how the father, he used to bath in the in a very noisy manner, slapping soap on his back, find sources for a familiar sheep mouth look in a sepia wedding, picture of father in the turban, mother standing on her bare splayed feet, silver rings on her second toes. So this is a traditional way in an Indian marriage, and he recognizes in the old photograph which has turned yellowish how the father, he was wearing a turban and in a very uh, fashionable dress, traditional dress, while the mother, she was standing barefoot and she wore silver rings around the second toes. So this is how the Indian wedding photograph is often described. and reduce the entire career of my recent unique self to the compulsion of some high sentence in his Smilesian diary. And your father gone irrevocably in the age after changing every day your youth's evening. Now, this again is a very ironical statement, and the speaker, he ridicules his wife's father. He says the, the wife's father for having been an ill-tempered man, though by now he has greatly mellowed down, softened. But the speaker, he also ridicules his father, his wife's father, for his habit of pacing to and fro, that is the movement pacing to and fro and smoking a cigarette while he waited for her return from her dates. So the father of the wife, he used to wait for the return of the daughter from her dates. Then he ridicules her father for having expressed the view that there was no wickedness in remembering one's past misdeeds. He calls these misdeeds. And he used to keep a diary full of wise remarks, like the famous writer Samuel Smiles, whose books are well known on self-help and wise living. So his father always used to keep, the wife's father always used to keep a diary in which he jotted down the wise and well-known deeds. Date with a nice Muslim friend. Now here again he reminds the wife of her dates with a Muslim friend who only hinted at touches, and now he questions that the friend, he always hinted at touches and didn't move beyond touches. Only 2 weeks ago in Chicago, you and your brother James started one of your old drag out fights about where the bathrooms was in the backyard. So these are the petty things, small childlike things, childlike behavior of the wife, where in Chicago with her brother James, she ran into an argument about the situation of the bathroom, where the bathroom was situated in the house, whether it was in the backyard, north or southward of the well, next to the jackfruit tree. So the poet, he says that the wife and her brother James, this is how they started quarreling about the petty things. Really, nowhere as the two of you go down in the floors, draw blueprints of the house from memory of everything, from newspapers to the backs of envelopes and road maps of the United States that happened to flap in the other room. In the midnight wind, you wagged heirlooms and husband's earnings on what the uncle in Kuwait would say about the bathroom and the well and the dying, by now dead tree. So the poet says that he is not changed much in all these years and of married life. He remembers an instance 2 weeks ago where his wife and her brother James, they started fighting about the location of bathroom in grandfather's house in Elipe, that is the native place, and how even the uncle living in Kuwait, he also jumped into that quarrel, and they said that we will ask the uncle about the location of that bathroom. So the poet, he says that apart from these satirical attacks on his wife, on his wife's father, and on himself, and on his own father, and on his wife's brother, the wit shows itself, the speakers pointing out that the ancient habits, mythologies of the Indian family, how they creeps in. Tree next to it. Probably only the Egyptians had it right. Their kings had sisters for queens. To continue the incest of childhood into marriage, or we should do as well, meaning Hindus did. So he again now questions, uh, he raises a question. He says that he talks about the Egyptian practice where the heirs of the throne they married their sisters, keeping in view that the kingdom doesn't get divided. So he says that this practice it doesn't exist in Hindus. Had it existed in Hindus, I would have done that, so that I had known my sister better. I would have shared much ideas about her. But this practice is not here in Hindus. It is a Egyptian practice. Betrothals before birth, forestalling separate horoscopes and mother's first periods, and wed us in the oral cradle and carry marriage back home, the namelessness of childhood. He says that even sometimes in India also, he says for marriage proposals we match horoscopes. But look at the marriage partners before the birth of child. Some mothers, some expected mothers, they talk whether I will give birth to a baby boy or a baby girl, will marry them, because our thoughts, our ideas match so much. So will be the ideas of our child. But he says that they horoscopes, they match the horoscopes before marriage, and it is a common practice in Hindu families. But it is not a surety whether the child marriage will succeed. It will not, because we do not share the same ideas, we do not have the same wavelengths of thought. Dear students, the poet in this poem, he says that the right thing is establishing a custom that the heir to the throne he should marry, the Egyptian concept. But in Hinduism, there is no such concept, and the poet he insists that we should not at all practice this mismatch of marriage like the Egyptian custom into Hindus. The speaker he gives another witty turn to his argument when he speaks about the habit of some Hindu mothers to betroth their sons and daughters even before the marriage. For instance, the family reunion at which cousins sip brandy and chew cashew nuts. So the poem is all about the relationships. At the end, we have no hesitation in saying that the love poem for a wife is one of the masterpieces of Ramanujan, and the poet he feels that the relationships and also the persisting bitterness and jealousy which have been responsible for the speaker's own emotional dryness and barrenness is represented in this particular poem. Dear students, I hope you have understood the poem. We'll take up another poem by Ramanujan in the next video. Thank you very much.